Right. Hi, everyone. Noswaith welcome to this evening. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes for people to join, and then we can get cracking. Great. Well, yeah, if we get going, so Noswaith everyone. My name is Dr. Dan Jones. I'm a public health registrar, LTFT myself, working on alcohol rota. I'm the deputy chair for terms and conditions in Welsh Resident Doctors Committee. It is just me tonight on the rep side, so I have some BMA staff helping me, but just do bear with in terms of questions. We will aim to answer all the pre-submitted ones, and feel free to pop questions in as we go along. If we can't get to them all this evening, then we will post the answers subsequently in the WhatsApp group and stuff, or attempt to cover them in our FAQs. So, and apologies to anyone who has seen this talk before. Some of it will be familiar, some of it will be new, but the main thing we're focusing on is the questions and stuff tonight. So, there is we have the Reform Resident Doctor contract being put out to referendum shortly. So first, we just want to talk about in terms of how we got here. So there was an attempt to renegotiate a contract previously between 2019 and 2022, in a very different climate. Membership rejected that contract. They did it for a number of reasons. The new committee then had a focus on full pay restoration. That ultimately culminated in industrial action and 3 rounds of strikes. And then that in turn managed to get us a new pay offer in June 2024. And that was eventually accepted by membership resoundingly. That pay offer contained a commitment to explore contract reform again. And so in the aftermath of that, we held a whole series of engagement events across Wales, both online and in various workplaces. Took a lot of the learning that we had from the previous attempts. Also looked at BMA policy, contracts abroad, and the like. And that ultimately culminated together into a negotiating mandate that was approved by your elected committee. We appointed negotiators and trained them up, and then those negotiations proceeded for several months before eventually a package was reached, and the committee felt that that was the best package that we could get with the leverage that we have, and so they opted to put that to you unanimously. And then we did have to wait for the cabinet secretary to approve the final package, and as soon as that happened, we were in a position to start sharing the details. So, in terms of what is on offer, the first thing to look at is pay, and we do want to contextualize this in our pay restoration aspirations. So we have our target to get back to 2008 levels as measured by RPI. You can see that at the start of the pay restoration campaign, we dropped to this nadir of 29.6%, and we've been making good progress on that. There is a question in terms of this pay round, because currently we've moved just from 20.8 to 19.1. The package has 4% additional investment in the resident doctor workforce. Most of that is going into pay. The way that we measure pay restoration does account for that. And so if this package was to be accepted, this would be the effect on our pay restoration aspiration. So we'd be getting to 16.1%. That is a level of resident doctor pay that's not been seen since 2015. caveats notwithstanding that this is not a typical additional pay uplift. It comes in from August 2026. It won't come in as a flat percentage uplift for everyone. So there is a bit more nuance to it than just an additional pay award. But nevertheless, we feel that it makes significant progress towards full pay restoration, certainly with the current leverage that we have, and it's your judgment in terms of whether this progress is good enough or whether we need to be going for more. In terms of the pay system, that breaks down into 4 elements, which are going to be of interest this evening. So basic pay, additional hours, out of hours, and then non-residential on call. I'll talk through each of these in turn now. So the basic pay, here are the proposed scales and the current scales, and these are annual basic pay figures for the nominal 40-hour working week. So if you are full-time non-residential on call, again, you should be getting this. If for those people who are less than full-time this evening, the way that this will work is your basic pay will be calculated according to your average total hours as a percentage of the nominal 40-hour working week. So, for a lot of LTFT people that say like you are working 80% on a 48-hour full-time equivalent rota, that won't translate into 32 hours on average a week. That will translate into something like 38 hours on average a week. And so the way to account for that under this pay scale is to essentially divide that 38 by 40 and then apply that to whatever pay point you're on, and that will come up with your annual basic pay for yourself. So as an LTFT person, I'll talk about additional hours in a moment, but you won't get the additional hours payment, but your basic pay will be based on your average total hours. And so it won't be a pro rata percentage or anything like that. It will be looking at all the hours you work on average a week. So that's normal shifts as well as out of hours shifts, totting that up, and then it's the percentage. So you can actually see that, say in that 80% on a pretty intense rota scenario, you would be getting close to actual full-time basic pay on that level. And the key thing is that basic pay is pensionable, everything else is typically not. So historically, that has hit LTFT doctors quite hard. Because our pension scheme is career average earnings, and therefore the pro rata amounts, which is roughly how the 2002 contract works. There are F bands, but you end up on proportionately less basic pay, and that can really affect your career average earnings for the worse in terms of pensionability. One of the advantages of the new basic pay scale is that because in many cases, you will be getting a substantive amount of the normal basic pay, that it will have a very beneficial effect on your pension earnings. So that is the breakdown in terms of LTFT, and then in terms of how this pay scale actually works. So the F1 and the F2 sections have been consolidated into single pay points. You can see that they are higher than the equivalent on the 2002. And then the post-foundation registrar aspect of the scale will remain years in service. It's just been consolidated into 5 points. And so instead of incrementing every year, you increment every 2 years. There's still an ability to claim incremental credit as you would do now. So if you do clinical fellowships, they're 3 years, etc. If you work abroad, if you do an UP or take time out of training for statutory leave, like parental leave, this all still ultimately contributes to incremental credit and 2 years in service-based pay progression. And the years in service-based pay progression, as is the case now, remains based on calendar years. So it's not set by training grade, it's not set by training year, it is set by the calendar year. So just as is now, you'll get an increment date. It will just be every 2 years roughly, rather than every year. Obviously, if you start partway in a pay point, you'll get it the next year. So I hope that makes sense. The main you can see that the equivalent basic pay point is higher than on the proposed one than the 2002 one. The main thing to caveat here is this transition from 2 to 3 as a pay point. So this was a concession we had to make, and that will be known as an enhanced pay progression point. So it's still the case that if you've got 4 years worth of incremental credit, then you will get access that pay point, or you've worked 4 years in service, you'll access that pay point. The only caveat is that 2 of those years or more must be spent in a formal training program or an equivalent, and there are criteria set out for that equivalent, for what that equivalent is. So a clinical fellowship year, a substantive post abroad, that kind of stuff would count towards those purposes. If you are working and it's not quite meeting those criteria, so for example, you're doing ad hoc locum work, then it will count as a half rate towards this gateway, as is the case with locum work, etc., for incremental credit at the moment. So we're not expecting many people to be affected by this gateway. And if you are, the effect would be that you would be held up for a little bit. And then once you hit those criteria, once you get that 2 years equivalent in a training program, you would catch up to whatever pay point you would be on normally. So again, not expecting many people to be affected by it, not expecting that much of an impact on those who would be, but it is just to be clear that that is the case. And I should say that the reason for consolidating the pay scale like this is ultimately to front load it. So the whole point of this proposed pay scale is that you get more money earlier on in your career, so the career average earnings are better, and again, there's quite a lot of benefits to that, both in terms of the pension earnings, but also in terms of things like the gender pay gap, etc., in terms of bringing forward the pay scale a bit, consolidating it, front loading, etc. And we'll talk about the effects for people who are currently high up the pay scale. But for anyone entering the pay scale as a new starter, you would benefit substantively from the front loading. And I have gone over this already, but again, it is just to summarize up on the slide, because we've had this as a recurring problem that people have flagged, and it will be, I'll be frank, that the language in the framework agreement could be a lot clearer on this point, but this is essentially how your basic pay works. So there's no proratering or anything like that. It is based on your average total hours. And so when you're using our pay tables on the web page, do use average total hours, and I appreciate they go up in 4 hours increments. So if it is something like 37 or 38 average hours a week, then you will have to kind of read between the points, unfortunately, but hopefully it gives you a rough idea. And this is the kind of rough formula, and it's just making that point that I made earlier about you getting quite close to you get a much more basic pay under this scenario than you would under the 2002 contract. And yeah, some of the stuff that's come out of the woodwork is people claiming to be LTFT despite working more than a 40-hour average. Under both contracts, 2002 and the proposed one, in order to, contractually speaking, to be LTFT, you have to work below 40 hours a week on average. If you are more than that, then you are paid as a full-time equivalent. The additional hours, so this is just relevant to those of you on the call who are non-residential on call but working full-time. We wouldn't expect anyone who's part-time to get this, because you have to be working less than 48 hours by definition. But if you are full-time and you are working beyond 40 hours, then essentially every hour beyond 40 on average a week that you work, you get an additional payment for on top of your basic pay. And then the out of hours payment. So this is relevant for everyone. Essentially, you get topped up to 1.5 the basic hourly rate. And so that's why in our pay tables, we talk about unsocial hours as well as total hours. And the unsocial hours basically give you a bonus on top of your basic pay and your additional hours if you're full time. And in terms of what contributes to out of hours, we've retained the playing time definition in the 2002 contract, so it remains 7 a.m., 7 p.m., Monday to Friday. We have now clarified that bank holidays are not considered playing time. They were under the 2002 contract. And it's also to be clear that when it comes to things like night shifts or disco shifts, even if the shift runs into playing time hours, all of the hours in that shift will count towards this unsocial payment. So if you are doing 8 to 8 nights, that last hour will be counted as unsocial, even though it technically falls in playing time, if that makes sense. And then the non-residential on call. So I'll talk about this in more depth, given the nature of the webinar, than I normally would do. But essentially, you get a consistent baseline, which is all of your rostered on-call hours. You get paid at a 50% availability rate for, and so the pay is based on your personal rota slot. So you'll get that as a baseline. And then any work that you do in an on-call duty period will get topped up to 100% of the rate. And if it happens out of hours, then it gets topped up to 1.5 out of the rate. And you'll claim that retrospectively through a expenses system effectively. It is how other NHS staff groups do it. So the software and everything is already there. You will be able to do it in batches. And there are apps that facilitate this. So we're not expecting this to be too administratively onerous. And the way that it will work will be that you'll get paid in the next payroll cycle. So you get the availability supplement as that consistent baseline, and then whatever on-call work you do, you'll get topped up by that in the next payroll cycle. And if you do work more than 75% of the shift, then it's paid out as if you work the entire shift as another element. Happy to answer questions on that, but I think that's it for the pay aspect. And then for the predictable on-call work, it's just in terms of working out your average hours and stuff. So we appreciate that a lot of specialties will set non-residential on-call. And to be clear, what I mean by that is that you are off-site, but you are available to give telephone advice or to return to sites if you're called in. But we know that a lot of specialties will schedule ward rounds or handovers or a normal working day as part of an on-call duty period. That will be accounted for if it's predictable, and that will be used in the job planning process, which I'll talk about in a bit. And that will just make sure that all of your working time limits and everything are being met. And then, for for your on-call work when you're non-residential on call, or for any overtime you do on your normal rostered hours, so that bit is relevant to those of you who are LTFT, you will be able to claim all of that pay. And again, it's a similar process in terms of it will be an expenses system. For both aspects, there won't be supervisor involvement. You won't need to any electronic proof or anything like that. You will be trusted to report your hours accurately. It is something that other NHS staff groups do. It should be quite a simple process, hopefully, and we'll be working with employers to ensure that it is. And essentially, if you work beyond your rostered hours, you claim that. If you do any on-call work, you claim that. So you will be accurately paid for the work you do. If you have a busy on-call shift, that will be reflected. If you do overtime, that will be reflected. And it's just to say that even for people who remain on the 2002 contract, we will be introducing an amendment into that if this package is accepted, and that will replace rota monitoring with this overtime system. So you get access to it in that scenario, regardless of the contract you're on. Um, there are pay supplements. We've done a GP registrar webinar already where we talked about that extensively, and then there's a max fax one as well that reflects changes that we've made in the pay scale and the fact that they have to repeat foundation twice. Prospectively, there is an issue. There is a potential to develop recruitment and retention premium in future, but the key thing is that will be by HIW employers, Welsh Government, with additional funding. So we've not had to allocate any funding from the contract package in order to meet any recruitment and retention premium. So it's just to point out there. One of the other issues that we've had quite frequently with people is accounting for leave when they're doing their calculations. So it's both annual leave and study leave and public holidays. Essentially, this is the relevant contractual language, but because an employer will typically put you into prospective cover, and therefore it means that you can't take leave against a shift that is enhanced. It's important to deduct all of your leave from the rota that is being used to calculate your pay before you feed it in, essentially. And so the effect is normally that all of your unsocial work is compressed into the remaining rota, and effectively you're being compensated for the prospective cover that you're representing for the fact that you can't just take leave against any shift. And we'll illustrate the difference that makes now. So you can see, so in terms of we do have a average hours calculation crib sheet now on our contract webpage, which goes into a bit more detail with it. But it's just to say that in this scenario, and I'll spell out what this means in terms of pay, we've got an 80% 12-week emergency medicine rota. This person's got 3 years incremental credit. Their prorated amount of leave over that period is about 13 days leave. So that's their prorated portion in that amount. The full-time equivalent would normally be 33 days annual leave, 30 days study leave, and then 80 public holidays. So you deduct the leave hours for that, you deduct the leave weeks for that, and so you can see that we're effectively dividing the total hours and the enhanced hours by 8.75 rather than 12, and that results in quite a significant increase in the average hours per week, the average total hours per week, as well as the enhanced hours per week. So it's just important to account for that. And in this particular example, because the rota was coming out with 35 hours, this person was on F8A banding, so they were just below that 36, well, not just below, but they were below the 36-hour mark that would take them into F9A. This is what it looks like at the pay point, and then at the equivalent pay point, once we've actually accounted for the leave deducted, they were on 36.25 total hours per week, and then 16.5 hours of those were unsocial. So in order to their pay point is 2 as the equivalent, and then in order to work out their basic pay, it's that 36.25 divided by 40 times the basic pay point. That gives them their basic pay. And again, hopefully you can appreciate that that is a lot higher than 80% to 55,000. So the basic pay difference between these two contracts is very substantive when it comes to LTFT, and that has a big impact on pension earnings. And then as well as their basic pay, they get topped up for those unsocial hours as well. And that's where that 12,000 figure comes from. So you can see that there's a positive difference here. And then I wanted to do a microbiology rota just for those of you who are non-residential on call as well. So this was 1B banding, and we took a typical pattern where we just took this is typically 1 in 7, 1 in 8 frequency for on call, but we also factored in the predictable on call element. So normally it's about 39 hours a week once you deduct leave, and then predictably they're doing 4 hours of on call work, of which 3.5 are unsocial, and that is just reflecting having to come in to do ward rounds and be on site in a predictable manner. So when you're thinking about pay or doing pay comparisons, it is important to account for that, because that is what you would be getting retrospectively. So we'd done that, and then once we'd accounted for the predictable on-call work, just factored in another 15.25 hours of on-call availability per week on average. And again, it's important to deduct leave from the rota when you're calculating on-call availability. And here you can see that it's 12.75 on the total rota, but it goes up to 15.25 once you deduct leave. And we've got that crib sheet on the web page that talks you through how to deduct leave. And so here they get their basic pay for being full time. They then get their additional hours. In this case, in reality, this would be through claimed pay, but we presented it like this just for ease. Same with the unsocial hours as another top up. And then they get their on-call availability on top of that. And then you can see that this is quite favourable, as indeed we've generally found the on-call rotas to generally be favourable, comparing one contract to the other, as in 2002 to the proposed one. Safety and training. So I'll go through this bit a bit more quickly than I normally would do, but this will introduce job planning for everyone, and that will set out your typical pattern. And as I said, for previously for non-residential on-call, that will account for predictable on-call work, and that will be used for the hours limits, etc. That will all be built in. And this will introduce a contractual right to a bespoke job plan if you're LTFT. So we know that some employers are okay on this and do a decent job with this. Others give people rotas and say that's your lot, and they don't really work with people well in terms of when they want their non-working days to be, things like that. This proposed contract would give you a more of a sound basis to actually negotiate an individual bespoke plan for yourself. The job plans will also contain safe staffing levels for each shift, and it'll also set out and define your educational development time, and that will be contractual as well. And then in addition to all of this, again, we know that job plan delivery can be a big issue for LTFT doctors. This introduces timelines for roster delivery, and there will be fines if these timelines are not met. The proposed contract also introduces series of limits on working hours. This is not exhaustive here, so there are others on our webpage and in the framework agreement, but these were the kind of critical ones we thought for this audience. So you can see that there is the standard no more than 48 hours worked on average in a week, and some of the other protections, in particular compared to the old contract, the 2002 contract, you could see that there's new limits around how many consecutive long shifts you can do. And then if you're LTFT, there is going to be a weekend frequency of 1 in 7 as a limit. And if you are non-residential on call, then currently it is a 36-hour maximum on-call duty period length, and that can rise up to 56 across the weekend. So that will be brought down to 24 and 48 respectively. And then you've got the protection of having to get 8 hours rest within a 24-hour on-call duty period, of which 5 of those hours must be continuous rest between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. And you can only get consecutive on-call duty periods on a weekend. The contract also introduces 2 tied drive home provisions, and I guess relatedly to that, if you are non-residential on call and you don't meet those rest requirements, then you would be able to submit that as an exception report, which I'll talk about in a minute, but that is separate to the overtime reporting system. You'd get reimbursed some additional money for that as a result of a fine to the employer, and there would have to be an arrangement for you to get time off in lieu the next day, so to hand over safely, but then you would not be expected to work the next day normally, and the employer would have to make alternative arrangements because you haven't met your rest requirements. if we go through, yeah, and similarly, so the proposed contract introduces an exception reporting system. This is different to the overtime one. This only involves your educational supervisor and a guardian of safe working, which is an independent senior doctor, and is the main purpose of exception reporting will be safety and training. So mistraining opportunities, for example, less than minimum staffing, and as I just mentioned, working on call duties, but it just being a very busy one and not being able to meet your rest requirements. And it's not to basically say that that can never happen or to hammer employers about that, but it is just to say that we need to work to minimize the amount that it's happening. An exception reporting system is one way of doing that. It's about safety and it's about compensating you for the breach, and then ensuring that you don't have to work the next day. And in terms of that guardian of safe and flexible working, so that will be a senior independent doctor in each health board. They'll monitor the overtime and the exception reporting levels. They'll convene resident doctor forums in every employer, and the role of those will be to spend any fine money that's been accrued on things like well-being and training. And then again, relevant for all doctors actually, but particularly for LTFT doctors because they tend to make more use of flexible working rights, is that part of this role in the contract will be to promote and improve access and support to flexible working. Transition arrangements. So quickly, so this is the rough timetable. The new starters will, from August 2026, if this package is accepted, would start on this one. And then certain specialties would be transferred over, classically the unbanded ones. And then from August 2027, the remaining ones will be able to transfer over to the contract. In terms of what happens if you are not a new starter, essentially you stay on the 2002 contract, you continue to increment on the 2002 contract. The 2002 pay scale will continue to have the annual pay awards uplifted to it. So from your perspective, not a lot will change in terms of your pay journey. It will continue as it would do now. And then from August 2027, you will have the option to transfer onto the new contract. And then in August 2028, we would expect most people to have transferred onto the new contract, unless you're within 12 months of CCT, or you meet certain exception criteria, which we'll be working with employers on. But again, we'll be ensuring that people who have extenuating circumstances won't have to transfer over if they don't want to. If you do transfer over, then you will get a cash flow no detriment arrangements, and we've had quite a few questions on that, so I'll talk about them when I can, when we come to the Q&A. But essentially, it's based on your total pay the day prior to transfer, usually, and that your pay can never drop below that. So you'll carry on being paid at that level. You can do it at an opportune moment, say ahead of a rotation or potential rota change, and that will stay with you until your pay on the new contract overtakes it, at which point the new contract takes over. But it is just to assure everyone for both LTFT and non-residential on-call and full-time shifts that the majority of rotas that we've modelled, once you account for leave deduction, do see a pay uplift on the proposed contract, particularly for people earlier on in the pay scale because they're benefiting from that front loading. But the nature of the banding system as it is, and these very yes, no banding criteria means that currently there are people doing similar amounts of work on very different pay, and equally people on doing very different amounts of work, doing very different amounts of work on same pay and vice versa. So it is very difficult to account for that, but we have these transition arrangements and the cash flow pay protection in order to deal with it. And then just quickly, I'm sure a lot of you will have seen this stuff before, but there are study leave changes. There is immediate, more quick fix stuff like increasing the budget cap, ensuring that it starts to rise with inflation, making sure that it rollovers infinitely rather than being capped out to 1,200, and getting you reimbursed at the point of expense submission. So this is not the scope of our ambition. We, in the more medium to long term, and we have already prospectively agreed with employers that this is what we want to do. Centralize the funding, get as many of your courses and the like prepaid and pre-booked for you, and then to get you a discretionary pot outside of that. So that is the ambition in the longer term. But in this package, we just wanted to get some short-term fixes that would come in sooner rather than later and start to improve your situation. And then we know that medical unemployment is a massive issue for people as well. And it is just to say that that is in there. There are commitments in there to work with us on looking at bottlenecks, why they occur, and recommending post-expansion where it is appropriate. There's already been significant post-expansion recommended by HRW for the next year. We're just waiting for the Welsh Government response to that, but of course we've been lobbying on it. And it is just to assure that we're very cognizant of post-CCT employment issues as well, and that would factor into the work. The last thing is, we do want to talk about concessions. So I mentioned the 4% additional investment. Ideally, we would want more. That would have helped a lot with some of the pay stuff that people have mentioned. 4% was the limit of extra stuff that we could ask for, and that was with the threat of industrial action at the time. So certainly we feel that we will probably need to undertake actual industrial action in order to get more than that. We, as a standard part of a lot of pay offers at the moment, we agreed not to promote the 2002 rate card if it's accepted, but then to enter into talks with employers about a potential new all Wales rate card agreed between us and employers. And if those talks don't go anywhere, or if we end up in dispute again, then we can reintroduce our rate card. I talked about the pay progression scale already. I talked about transition, and just to maximize flexibility and planning and stuff for yourselves. I know that a lot of you will have been on 2002 for a while, for example. We did want to retain an option where you could stay on 2002 for longer than 2028. The original employer position was to not run two contracts at the same time at all, and to minimize that. And so the 2028 is very much a compromise. And then, but as a result of retaining years in service pay progression, part of that was that then acting as a form of pay protection for people returning from career grades. So SAS contracts, for example, they'll still get all of their post-foundation incremental credit, so they'll start high up on the pay scale. We're not really expecting this to be much of a problem, but they did get basic pay protection under the 2002 contract, and so it is just to point out that that was a concession. We've had a lot of and we talk about this a lot on the web pages and stuff, a lot of stuff about banding, and certainly when we engage membership, there were lots of mixed views, and I'm sure that people here will be aware of the advantages and disadvantages of that system. But given the balance of benefits and disbenefits, and then where there was consensus with membership was the fact that things like rota monitoring doesn't work, that people did want pay front loaded, so they get more, so long as their career average earnings were higher, they would want more of that like earlier on in their career when pay is more sensitive, and people were also quite keen for personalized pay as well. So the idea that if you do more shifts on a rota cycle than colleagues, then you should get more pay for that. And so with all of that in mind, that is why the committee opted to move away from banding and towards hours-based working. But these are two pay systems. They have their advantages and their disadvantages, and the choice is ultimately yours. But the benefit of the hours worked at the very least is that it's linear and it corresponds with your total and your unsocial hours, whereas the banding system is very much one that can jump up and down depending on whether you meet criteria or not. The online referendum, this will all be open as an online referendum from the 24th of November to the 15th of December, and it's all resident doctors working in Wales, as well as final year medical students studying here. And you will have to be a member to vote, and so it's important to join by the 9th of December in order to have your say. And the last thing is that we have a lot more information on our webpage. The QR code is there. And if you can't find your answer on that webpage, or you've got queries about other things, then please do get in contact with us at this email, or alternatively, we've got the WhatsApp community, so feel free to send a message on that and we can calculate it. So thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr. And yeah, we'll move to questions now. I'll stop sharing. Right. So these, I'll do a couple of pre-submitted ones and then see if we've had any submitted during the talk. And apologies, it is just going to be me talking this evening because I'm the main person here. So first thing to say is we had a lot of people talking about their individual circumstances with their pay, and obviously I don't want to use up a lot of time going through each of them point by point. So we do have resources up now on the webpage to hopefully allow you to work it out if you want to do that. But obviously you do have the assurance of being able to remain on the 2002 contract and to get cash flow protection anyway if you're worried. But if you do have any concerns about your pay situation, then please just get in contact with us on the WhatsApp group, and I'm very happy to look at anyone's rota or answer any questions on it. The first other question we've had beyond just individual pay calculations was around someone working non-residential on-call psych, and it was just talking about when they're called in to cover for someone who's a resident on call, and having to go on site for at length for assessments. And so, as they said during the talk, if you work more than 75% of the shift, you get paid for the full shift, and then you've got to have those rest requirements. If you don't get those rest requirements, and that's 8 hours per 24, 5 hours continuous between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. If you don't get those, then you will the employer will get fined. You will get some of that fine money. The other bit of the fine money will go into a pot for resident doctors to be spent on things like wellbeing and training. Again, that process doesn't necessarily have to involve your placement supervisor or anything. And then the arrangement should be made by the employer so that you don't have to work the next day, hand over safely, and then be able to go home. And you'll get that time as time off in lieu. And then I had another one. If you are on higher base pay points than your stage of training, how will this work? Will you transition across to a higher basic pay point in the new contract due to experience? Yes, that's exactly what happens. So it's still years in service-based pay progression. You still claim incremental credit. So that aspect of it is not changing. It's very much the same. And then for hospital-based specialties who are currently 50% banded, how does the new out-of-hours payment work? As in the contract, it talks about hours above 40, but this would be hours above 28, for example, for 70%. So I hopefully by talking through the pay system, I've done that justice a bit in terms of your LTFT. Your basic pay is based on your average total hours per week, which has to be below 40, and that will be as a percentage of the 40-hour working week. So if you're on a very intense rota and say your percentage is 70% or 80%, it will be quite high. It certainly won't be 28 hours. And then the unsocial work you do, that attracts a top up, and that will essentially enhance your pay and act as a bonus. Then the next one, and then I'll look to see if we've had any submitted, is will rota coordinators be able to assign more than average weekly hours? So current average hours are 32, but some weeks still have 50 hours. So again, that aspect is not changing per se. So long as they are meeting the average working week requirements, then they are then it will be, you will work more than that in some weeks. You will work less than that in other weeks. So long as the average comes out in line, then they would be able to do that. I would say that there are a lot more stringent rostering criteria in the proposed contract than the current one. And I think in particular for LTFT, the weekend frequency limit of 1 in 7 will probably make rostering, particularly intense patterns quite difficult. But a lot of that detail is set out on the web page. Will we be pay? Sorry, that was a related one. Are payroll going to be equipped or trained to handle what seems to be more laborious method of calculating pay? So this will all just be done by rostering software. There are versions of this already available. Confident that by the time this contract comes in, we can make the adaptations and stuff, and there is rostering software that out there that is able to handle personalized rota slots and work out averages. And to some extent, that is how the 2002 payroll works at the moment. And certainly colleagues in England are on an hours worked model, and their payroll uses software in order to calculate it. So the answer to that question is yes, essentially. If there is contract likely to have an adverse effect on the pay with those a large number of NROCs, so currently paid at 0.9 FTE, although working 0.8, this is due to the on-calls. So yeah, I guess that is probably a situation where your average total hours mean that you're coming out at F9 rather than F8 because you're working between 36 and 40 hours a week, I'm guessing, even though you're 80% LTFT. And again, the principle of the basic pay in the proposed contract is to do something similar but more accurately. So if the full-time equivalent rota is more intense, then you won't get prorated at 80% of 40. You won't end up at 32 hours. You'll get closer towards what the full-time equivalent is at the 80% level. And then equally a similar principle is there for your on-call duty periods. So if you have a lot of on-call duty periods despite being LTFT, then you get compensated for that. And again, it's not like banding where you either meet a criteria or you don't. It's a linear system. So the more on-call duty periods that appear in your rota cycle, the more pay you will get. And then this will be the last one that I'll do from pre-submitted. Why is the BMA proposing contract that will lead to pay erosion for senior trainees? So I think it's important to be cognizant that the vast majority of rotas, even for people high up on the pay scale, and at LTFT doing non-residential on call, this has all been modelled. The pay is either comparable or it goes up for the vast majority of them. There's only a few scenarios where it will go down. And that is mainly as a reflect of the banding system. And we talk about this pretty extensively in the FAQ section on our webpage. But situations where the rota is more intense than is allowed under the proposed contract. And so it's difficult to pay it accurately. And so, for example, if you work more than 1 in 7 weekends as LTFT, and then another example where people are getting very high banding, but they're not they're not being rostered a lot of hours necessarily commensurate with that. So classically 1B banding for average total hours of 41 or 42, which does crop up, and it's very difficult, particularly high up on the pay scale, in order to compensate for that. But that's why we have got the ability for people who do find themselves in such a situation to remain on the 2002 contract for the time being, and to get cash flow protection when they transfer. And then for the new starters coming through, because this is a front-loaded pay scale, and because most of the rotas, the vast majority of the rotas pay out, we would expect their career average earnings to be net positive. Certainly, once you account for the higher pension earnings, the net financial impact to be positive for all of those new starters, and they will reap the benefits of that. And then, as I say, for the people who've been in the system for a while, who are high up in the pay scale, that is why we have built the transitional protections the way that we have. So I hope that makes sense. But and there's and the candor is there with that. There's better and more full explanations in our FAQs and on the web page. But it's certainly, we don't set out to erode or to cut anyone's pay. That is not happening here. And as we pointed out from the pay graphs, this ultimately, for the pay bill as a whole, another 4% is going in. So this is a contract that moves us forward on the pay restoration journey. I've not had any submitted questions, so I'm just going to check the Q&A itself. Oh, right, there's a couple here. That's fine. Just to check, if we do a normal working week 9 to 7 for 9 to 5, sorry, for micro, and then 5 to 1, does the 5 to 7, 7 to 9 bit periods count as out of hours rates? Yeah, so yeah, you'd be claiming those, and they wouldn't, because they fall into plain time. So anything between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m., whether it's worked on call, whether you work it as unpredictable on call work, whether you uh, uh, work it as a normal rostered shift, or you claim it as overtime, that gets enhanced. But those hours between 5 to 9 and 7 to 9, they count as plain time, as they do now under the 2002 contract for rostering purposes. What happened to pay point 9 on the current pay scale? I won't go back to the presentation, but I'm pretty sure pay point 9 is in there. So I don't think anything's been omitted, but if it has, oh, okay. Sorry, I've just been told. Sorry, it's been that we've been chopping and changing these presentations quite a bit as we go from webinar to webinar. So that's been accidentally cut off there. So that is actually a good spot. But if you want to see what the pay point 9 is, then just go to the web page, and we've got the full table there. So nothing particular there. That's purely accidental. Apologies about that. Yeah, yeah. And I answered that. So yeah, and the current point 9 is 71,814 full-time equivalent, and then the equivalent of that is 78,000. But on the new pay scale, you effectively reach the top pay point a year earlier, again, because the attempt is to front load it. And I think that is it. So yeah, thank you for bearing with me. I've done a lot of talking this evening. Please, if anyone wants to now, you can quickly post a question and I'll attempt to answer it. I hope that I've done the pre-submitted questions justice as well. We were, if you're on the WhatsApp, and again, please feel free after this to use the WhatsApp as well. But if you are on the WhatsApp, you may have seen that there've been a couple of questions about how does cash flow pay protection work if you change your LTFT percentage at the time of transition? And that is a very good question, and it's one that we are working to clarify, and hopefully, we're confident we can come up with some kind of workable, sensible solution to that, because it doesn't really make sense to pay protect someone at a full-time equivalent, a full-time rate, if they're going into an LTFT rate, and vice versa. But as soon as we get a clarity on that question, we will let you know. but it is a very good one, and part of the reason we had this very long run in to the vote, so that if anything like that cropped up, we would be able to note it and respond to it rather than have it derail any voting periods and the like. Great. So there's nothing that's come in. So I think we will leave it there and end the presentation. But yeah, if anyone does have any further questions, please get in touch with us. We had the email in the presentation, but and it is on our web pages, and we also have the WhatsApp community as well. So oh, sorry, there's more that I've missed. Quick question, calculating weekly hours. When calculating annual leave, is calculation based on the amount we have available or the amount we actually end up taking? It's the amount that you have available, so it's prospective. So I know that very few people manage to use their full study leave allocation, but it all counts for as a leave entitlement for these calculations. So you don't have to do a real world scenario and based on like how much leave you're actually taking. It's prospective leave. And how do you add up your time worked when working NROP? If I take 3 calls that each last 10 minutes each, do I add these together and claim 30? No, you don't. So each individual episode, and so that would be each phone call, those all count, and you would round them up to the nearest 15 minutes. Now, I think when you're doing timesheets, and we will produce guidance on that, obviously, if you do a 5-minute phone call, you hang up and then you immediately get called and you get called again for 5 minutes. You may want to count that as one 15-minute sequence for the episode because it has occurred in that time frame. But if, for example, you had three 5-minute phone calls interspersed at different points of the evening, each one of those would count as a 15-minute episode for the purposes of timesheeting. And again, that's just reflecting the interruptive nature of these different episodes. So I hope that makes sense. But again, it's quite a favourable settlement for yourself. So even if you do less than 15 minutes, it will get rounded up to that point, and each discrete episode should count.